Here with John Ramdeen to chat about all of today's news happening in the world of mixed martial arts. And John, we are going to start in the 125-pound weight class because July the 30th, you're getting 2 title fights at UFC 201. We talked about Robbie Lawler, Tyron Woodley. You are also going to see Demetrius Johnson against Wilson Hayes for the flyweight title.
I know a lot of people may be scoffing at this title fight. We all recognize how good Demetrius Johnson is. It's very similar to the whole John Jones situation. I know everybody's they're getting very excited about this Daniel Cormier fight and maybe the Alexander Gustafsson fight. But I think whoever's standing across the cage from John Jones, people are like, oh, it's automatic that John Jones wins this fight. I think most people believe it with the Daniel Cormier fight and if the rematch was to happen between him and Gustafsson. And I look at it very much the same way with Demetrius Johnson. Everybody thinks that Demetrius Johnson is arguably the pound-for-pound best. We've seen his movement. We see his fight IQ. He seems to get better every time he steps foot in the cage. But we forget Wilson Hayes is a former champion as well, former Elite XC champion who has the great fortune of training with Dominic Cruz at Team Alliance. And you remember, what was Demetrius Johnson's last loss? To Dominic Cruz. So who knows? Maybe the team.
You worked overtime for that one.
Hey, maybe they're going to try to come up with a game plan because they've seen him in the past. Eric Del Fiero, very, very smart. Wilson Hayes has a specific way he can win this fight if he can manage. So if you can manage to get Demetrius Johnson stuck for 1 second and put this guy on the ground, let his jiu-jitsu shine.
Well, Demetrius Johnson is going to be a massive favorite for good reason in this fight. But as well, we talked earlier this week about the heavyweight division, and that is the hot potato championship. And we asked the question, does that help or hurt the division where a title can change hands with anybody in there? We have the complete opposite at flyweight, where it is a dominant champion and there's everyone else. And we're getting to the point where we're going to take someone from outside the UFC that's going to get a flyweight title shot before the end of the year. Is either proposition a solid one, or does it come down to you have stars and then you have people that may be great fighters but don't translate in that same degree? Does it hurt or help this division that Demetrius Johnson is just so dominant?
I mean, I think it doesn't really matter who, because the argument has been in the past, well, the 125-pound fighters, they don't have the knockout power of the welterweights, middleweights, light heavyweights, or heavyweights. But that's not necessarily true. Look at Demetrius Johnson's last number of fights. He has a number of stoppage victories in there. I think for Demetrius Johnson, it's kind of going to be like the Floyd Mayweather situation. Once you get to the 50-win mark, now again, I don't know if it's going to be 50, but Demetrius Johnson has to go on a long run. It has to be definitive that this guy is the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world, and then I think people will start to tune in. But I think more people will start to watch Demetrius Johnson because he has been finishing people, and he is exciting. However, what I do like is this idea of bringing champions in from all over the world, have them fight for the in the TUF show, and the winner.
Even
I don't know
if this ends up, this is a scenario.
I know this is the scenario.
As unlikely as it might sound today,
debut.
You could get Wilson Hayes taking on the winner of this tournament, where DJ doesn't even get the immediate rematch.
Yeah, I know. And I don't know if the UFC would actually do that, or if they would say
they would have to.
I know they would have to, but they don't really have to.
The whole season's geared around this title fight, so you have to have the champion defended on this finale.
But if we remember, that happened in Bellator. You win the tournament, you get a crack at the title. Some fighters are waiting like years for their title shot, and it could be the same situation because there's nothing. They're the promoter. They can say, actually, this is a bigger fight. Yeah, we're still going to give you your title shot if you win your next title fight, or if you win your next fight. So there's a whole bunch of things they can do. I think that's a good problem for the UFC to have if Wilson Hayes manages to become the champion. But again, I don't think anybody thinks it's going to happen because Demetrius Johnson just seems too motivated. He has too many good people around him. He seems to be grounded, and his head seems to be in the right place.
I want to get over to that season of The Ultimate Fighter, but one person in all of this who is connected to the season of The Ultimate Fighter is Joseph Benavidez. Here's someone that has had 2 opportunities against Demetrius Johnson. Last one was in 2013. I mean, in this sense, it's Wilson Hayes that jumps over him. Then you're going to have a whole season of Ultimate Fighting contestants that are also going to jump above him for a title fight. Where is Joseph Benavidez going at flyweight? Is this a dead end for him if he ever hopes for a championship title fight? Because we are really digging here for challengers for Demetrius Johnson. It seems that Joseph Benavidez has been written off by the UFC in terms of a guy that's going to be viable for another title fight as long as Demetrius Johnson's holding that title.
I totally understand, especially if you poll the MMA media and poll the fans, and if they're honest and they're objective about things, who is the number 2 or maybe number 3 guy at 125 pounds, consensus is going to be Joseph Benavidez.
I think most would say number 2.
Exactly. So the problem is he's already had his shots. He's already had the chance to fight for the championship, and he's always come out short, kind of like his teammate Uriah Faber.
So does he keep fighting at this division and just cash your checks, or do you exit out of the 125-pound weight class?
Maybe. I think at this stage, it's like, yeah, give me the most interesting fights, the fights that are going to make me the most money at 125 pounds. If that's not going to work, I'm sure if Uriah Faber can't manage to beat Dominic Cruz, I'm sure Joseph Benavidez would go up and fight Dominic Cruz for the title. However, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves.
So you like this season of The Ultimate Fighter with the flyweights?
I do like it. I think one of the reasons why I'm very, very biased, and Canada for years has been considered a hotbed of mixed martial arts, and I think that of all the divisions, lightweight's very, very good, but one of the most talent-rich divisions is 125 pounds in Canada. There's this undefeated kid, Austin Ryan, from out west. We have Yanni Sherbatov. We have Malcolm Gordon. We have Randy Turner. And, of course, one of the pioneers of mixed martial arts in Canada, Adrian Woolley. So 125 pounds has been very, very healthy. And I wouldn't be surprised to see Austin or Yanni Sherbatov go on to the show.
Well, speaking of Yanni Sherbatov, Mr. Segway a go-go here, we have Yanni Sherbatov, who this man spoke to in Laval, Quebec, discussing the state of the flyweights and heading in to this next season of The Ultimate Fighter. This is a guy who very well could be in that house.
What we have that maybe the big guys don't have is the being able to scramble, create situations that you will never see that with heavyweights. A good example, when you look at John Jones, that's the style that you're going to look at 125 pound. But with a 125 pound, that's what you see: elbows, knees, kicks, and then from an elbow you have a takedown. It's something that you're never going to see that in heavyweight. So I think that people miss. If people don't want to watch this because they're missing the idea behind that that's what martial art is. It's not the two guys standing and one who has the big punch finishes. It's the one who can put all that together and marry all the martial arts and show our abilities.
Is the hope as well, John, that this season of The Ultimate Fighter, you introduce these flyweights, you put them in the Ultimate Fighter setting, that the hope is that you'll have not just one guy that challenges for the title at the end of this, but a number of guys that at least the audience is engaged with, that we can find some fights for 2017. I don't want to just overlook and just rubber stamp that Demetrius Johnson is going to run through Wilson Hayes, run through the winner of The Ultimate Fighter, but conventional wisdom says that's the likely outcome.
Yeah, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to create stars in a division that kind of needs stars. Yes, we all look at we're looking at Demetrius Johnson. We recognize his skill. We recognize his talent. We recognize he's clearly one of the pound-for-pound best. But you need somebody else. Just like I was saying about Ronda Rousey, you can't just have a division dominated by one individual. You need to have a legitimate number 2, number 3, and number 10 challenger. And I think 125 pounds, if the UFC decides to go and bring in Legacy's Damasio Page, who is in the UFC, or Louis Gaudinot, who is a champion, fighters that the fans know and the casual audience have seen before, bring these fighters in, because you're also still trying to make a TV show. So you can go to Europe and try to bring some of those fighters in, but there's going to be an issue when it comes to having television and English speaking and so on and so forth. So you want skilled fighters. They're all going to be former champions or current champions. But I think that you need to build stars at 125 pounds. We need a lot of action fighters.
All right. Well, they have a potential star at 145 pounds, the division that you have been advocating for the UFC to add. And a strange moment on Wednesday night where UFC Tonight announced that Chris Cyborg, they are in talks to put her against Jermaine Durandamy at 140 pounds. And then Cyborg going on Twitter and stating, no, I'm defending my title at 145 pounds next. So we don't know what exactly is happening. And that fight would have been UFC 201 that they had reported on. But if you are Chris Cyborg and you are making the same amount of money, whether you fight Invicta or the UFC, which is cutting down to 140 pounds, what are you doing if you are Chris Cyborg?
I think Chris Cyborg's playing the proper game. She's like, actually, Invicta has been supporting me this entire time. I've been ringing the bell, telling everybody to tune in and watch me because I'm one of the most exciting fighters in the world. I'm going to garner everybody's attention. The UFC, only until this last fight in Brazil, were they willing to take that chance. I think she's being loyal, trying to give Invicta everything that they've given her. and as you mentioned, she's making the same amount of money to face, let's be honest, lesser talent than if she would be fighting in the UFC. However, it could be a negotiating ploy. Say, I'm going to fight here for this amount of money. The UFC says, well, even though you're under contract for Zuffa and we pay Invictus salary, we're going to sign you to a UFC contract and it'll be more money.
Quickly, let's chat about Bellator 155. Yeah. Friday night, they're back. Middleweight championship fight with Rafael Carvalho taking on Melvin Manhoff, who's coming off that recent kickboxing loss. And then also at 145, we have Pat Curran taking on Georgie Hanyu, which should be an excellent fight.
Yeah, I talked to Evan Boris, who was working with Pat Curran. He said since making the move from Jeff Curran's, his cousin, down to Florida, he says he's taken to the Henry Hoof system very, very well. They're looking at helping, or he's saying he's just adding to his already aggressive fighting style, and he says he's looking very good. He's very motivated, reinvigorated, and he says he's in a very good place in his life. So expect some fireworks from Pat Curran.
Yeah, an interesting card. You're also going to see Marcin Held against Dave Jansen.
Rematch.
Marlush Kunin as well on the card. We are back on Thursday night, May the 26th, with our next UFC Fight Night preview show, looking ahead to the UFC's card in Las Vegas, headlined by Thomas Almeida and Cody Garbrandt.